Atheist Ireland says children's rights not to attend religious education in school are not being observed. The group says families and children's constitutional rights are not being applied in the real world. Atheist Ireland appeared before the Oireachtas Committee on Public Petitions, and Jane Donnelly from Atheist Ireland said some schools are ignoring students' right not to attend religious classes. To discuss this further and find out is this the case in Clare, I'm joined in studio by Fr Ignatius McCormack, the former principal of St Flannan's College here in Ennis, and on the line we have Robert Bennett. Robert's from Ennistymon. He's a member of Midwest Humanists and also a former board member of the National Parents Council for Education, and really appreciate both of you joining us on the show. And Robert, I'll go to you first on this this call that Atheist Ireland is making. What do you make of it? Is it something you agree with?
Well, it's something that the people who founded our state agreed with, in the sense it's in our constitution. The only difficulty is that it's in our constitution explicitly. It's called Article 4424. I won't read it for you. I'm sure everybody can find it. And the difficulty is it expresses all that, but there is no legislation passed by the Dáil to put it into force. So I will read that only to the single paragraph.
Yeah, but you can read it for people not familiar.
Yes, legislation providing state aid for schools shall not discriminate between schools under the management of different religious denominations, nor be such as to affect prejudicially the right of any child to attend a school receiving public money without attending religious instruction at that school. So that opt-out from religious indoctrination or instruction is in our constitution, but it's not in our legislation. So for anybody who wishes to challenge the department on it, there isn't legislation. It would need to go to the High Court for a decision. So that is literally it.
And can I just ask you before I bring Father Iggy and Robert, when we say some schools are ignoring students' right not to attend religious classes, to clarify for people, does that mean there are no other options, so they have to learn religion like the other students, or they're exempt from learning, but because there's no other options or elsewhere for them to go, they're in the class and their ability to study some other subject is I suppose impeded by the fact that they are hearing the religion class still going on?
Yeah, yes, let's take it at its most good-natured and passive. Let's say that there is no separate provision for the children not be present during religious indoctrination of students who wish to have religion as a subject. But the logic sometimes put forward is that there isn't space in the school. They don't have enough teachers, for instance, to supervise a separate body of students who didn't wish to receive religious instruction. But there are creative ways around it which are used in other countries. You could, for instance, have religious instruction or indoctrination at either the beginning or end of the school day, so that the ones who weren't interested in that, didn't wish to attend, didn't have to be in the school.
What do you make of that, Father Ignatius, and maybe that latter option of having the religion class at the end of the school day? But maybe in order to be able to do that, how does that factor in logistically with teacher schedules and other subjects and so on? Maybe you can give us your experience on the ground when you were at Flannan's, how it worked for students who didn't, or their parents didn't want them to be learning religion.
I suppose I would stand back from the thing slightly, because this is being made all about religious ed and opt-outs of religious ed. My experience of primary schools, and I've been involved in boards all my life as a priest, which is 30 years, and in St Flannan's as principal, is that parents choose to opt their children out of a variety of subjects. So in particular in primary school, well-being, SPHE, music, PE, for various cultural and religious reasons, parents will withdraw their children from those subjects. And Irish, for example, 17,000 primary school children don't do Irish in this country.
And we know there's people who are not happy about that, want to see that addressed. But for students of Flannan,
boards of management and principals and individual class teachers have always managed that piece and managed it as best they can. So sometimes if a child is withdrawn from PE, it's not possible to have them in a separate part of the school. So they have to go to the PE class and maybe sit to one side or read a book or whatever. They're still being exposed to PE. The same with maybe music or well-being or SPHE, which is a contentious enough one with some parents. The child is withdrawn, but there may not be the provision in the school to have that child in a different classroom. So if you're doing what the other Robert has said and having religion at the start or end of the day, you'd then be setting a precedent. You'd have to do the same for SPHE or music or PE or the other subjects that students then, if they're not doing them, mightn't want to be exposed to.
Okay, well, let me bring Robert Bennett back in. Robert, what do you make of that point that Father Ignatius is making, that I guess religion isn't the only subject where this might be an issue? You might have to be rejigging the daily curriculum, and there's other subjects that students might opt out of, and it just becomes a bit of a maelstrom and a logistical nightmare and trying to sort all of that out.
Well, I suppose it's good to look at a bit of history. Only 10 years ago, we got rid of Rule 68 of national schools, which stated that religion had to be involved in all subjects in national schools. It permeated the whole curriculum. So obviously it didn't include mathematics, I suppose, but so we got away from that 10 years ago. So this is a matter of philosophical rights rather than just physical rights. In fact, if we were to have religion as a separate subject at the beginning of the day, we'd be reverting to the original rules of national schools. I don't know if you are aware of Bishop Doyle, who was very much involved in the setting up the national schools originally. And he said, until the time came when our children were sitting together in the same school and had religious instruction separately, which he was in favour of a Saturday, actually, and that was the rule for a while, that we wouldn't have peace in Ireland. That's a very strong statement. If you're ever down in Carlow, you'll see the beautiful cathedral which he built during that difficult period. So it's not as innocent as just we're moving from a subject which 10 years ago permeated the whole curriculum, and the Catholic Church were very upset when that rule was changed. So it's fundamentally more important than that. It's a philosophical question which separates society. I don't think people are separated in society anywhere other than by the ability of their children to play games, hockey or whatever it is that the father suggested they could opt out of. This is a sort of more fundamental, and especially that the schools, 90-something% of them are controlled by one religious denomination or sect in Ireland.
Yeah, let me bring Father Ignatius back in on that. What would you say to that, Father Ignatius? And I suppose that the 40% of parents who would prefer their children to attend multi-denominational schools.
Can I actually drill into that 40%? Only 41% of parents responded to that survey. So 40% of 41%.
Small enough sample size in your view.
So 40% of 41% is 16% that want change. It's not 40%. So I can't let that figure stand. When Robert says that the Catholic Church control 90% of schools, that's a word we don't recognise. We manage on behalf of the state at no cost to the state. So the second biggest voluntary group in Ireland are Catholic primary school managers and boards of management, second only to the GAA. We're doing a huge job of work for the state. So to say we control, we don't. We manage on behalf of both the patron and the state under all the rules that the state put in front of us. So to say we control anything, I just don't recognise that statement.
Okay, let me get Robert's response to that. Robert, what do you make that? You would say control, Father Ignatius would say manage, and you can opt out of learning religion and indeed other subjects as well, but the school, you can opt out of, but what the example Father Ignatius gave of PE, it's not possible sometimes to have a separate room or area where you can go to.
It's not indeed. But it is a requirement of Rule 70 of the Rules of National Schools that at the start of the student's education, that the parents are requested as to the religion of the parents. or the religion they wish to be taught in the school to their students. So it's sort of that question wouldn't be put in any other subjects. And the reaction of the Catholic Church 10 years ago, which you can still find on Google, of course, to the removal of Rule 68, which required the Catholic ethos to permeate the whole curriculum. Their reaction was so negative that I think the importance and the control of the Catholic Church is a bit more than the father suggests. I went, by the way, through in Ennis, the national school system, and in Ennistymon as a student. But in Ennis, I was involved in setting up a parents' association in a school, which wasn't very enthusiastically received. And I think that the issue of parent involvement is on the horizon also. But just sticking for the moment to the right of children to opt out of what is the fundamental part of people's lives, which is their religion, I think is a bit more serious than just a game.
Let me bring Fr Ignatius back in, and I want to maybe give you maybe a personal example. And I appreciate the point you were making that schools, a student can opt out, but it may not be possible to send them elsewhere. They may have to sit there during whatever class it is and do their own work. In my own school-going days in secondary school, I attended 2 secondary schools. I moved to the second one after 2 years, and I was at that for 3 years. The first school I was at, in terms of languages, Father, I had to choose. It was a choice between French and German. I chose French. But when I went to the second secondary school, they taught French and German. Obviously, after 2 years, I didn't have any desire, and also had 2 years of no German. So I didn't partake in the German classes, but I still had to stay in those classes. I tried to do other work, but I found, to be honest, this isn't me just making excuses for my subpar work, it was very difficult to focus on doing French or doing English or maths, because there's 29 other people and the teacher talking German and speaking about German, which I didn't understand, and it's just interrupting your train of thought.
Oh, absolutely. It's not ideal. But I would think, though, that schools do their very best to manage that piece as best they can. And it's not just in the context of people wanting to opt out of religious ed. As I've said, they opt out of wellbeing, SPHE, music, PE, Irish, or whatever they're not doing. Sometimes it's possible, maybe in a large school like, say, in Flannan's, you might be able to make other provision because it's so large. But in a smaller school, maybe a 2 or 3 teacher situation, it's not as easy to make that provision. But my basic point is students can opt out, and they're facilitated as best schools can manage that piece. And certainly, as church, we certainly are for people having the right, absolutely, to opt out of any subject, including RE, because the primary educator of the child under the 1998 Education Act is the parent. It's not the school, it's not the patron of the school, it's the parent themselves. They will make those decisions with and on behalf of their children.
Robert, I guess the situation, would you accept it to a certain degree that, look, if you don't, you can send your child to a non-denominational school if there happens to be one not near you, or there is no space at one, you can send your child to a school managed or controlled, as you would say, by the Catholic Church. You can opt out of religion class, but you have to accept that they will try and facilitate that as best they can, but it may involve your child still being in the room, and they'll just have to try and block out what's being taught and focus on learning another subject.
Well, first of all, of course, the patrons, including the Roman Catholic Church, they have a license from the Department of Education to be the patrons. So they choose to be the patrons of the schools, and they do control the schools. There isn't that much innocence involved as there shouldn't be, because the role of the Catholic Church is to promote the Catholic Church. So naturally, as the patrons, they have control of the education system practically. So their natural inclination would be to strengthen that. So I don't accept that it's not possible, as it was originally intended, that religious education, especially in our society where religion is quite important in sections of our country, it has caused an awful lot of trouble, the difficulties between religions. I think it's in the public interest that people are educated secularly and religion is seen as a personal or a family matter.
Okay, final word, because we're almost out of time too, Father Ignatius. Final response from you to that?
We trust in the professionalism of teachers and managers and boards of management and principals to manage this piece as best they can in the context of, an ever-changing educational system. And as I've said, there's so many subjects now that students will not want to do for various cultural and religious reasons. And schools do their very best in the round to manage that whole piece.
Okay, we do have to leave it there. My thanks to the former principal of St. Flannan's College, Fr Ignatius McCormack, and member of the Midwest Humanists and former board member of the National Parents' Council for Education, Robert Bennett.